Well, hello, future relatives. It's your old Uncle Jeff again. Are you having a good day? I hope you said so. I am. This vlog will be about our neighbors, the Pushings, and my best friend Brent. First, I'll bring you up to date, though, as to what happened in the first 6 months of 1956. So by this time after Christmas, I felt my family was intact. My mom was engaged to Uncle Pete. They were going to get married in the spring when the divorce was final. Nani had spent the summer in Europe on a pre-planned trip and was back. She'd let us use her TV while she was gone, so I got to see my first children's show, Pinky Lee. Bee was running our household, and I came home to her. We had a lot of fun together, and I was just quite happy by this time. I already started using Vadheim as my last name in school, and Miss Larson called my mom up and said, why is he doing that? And she explained that Pete Vadheim would become my father in the spring. It was okay for me to use his name already. So the divorce was final on March 18th. Through my research, I found out that Lloyd and Verna were living in Sioux City, Iowa. They went to Mitchell, South Dakota and got married a week later. I suspect that was because there was a shorter waiting period in South Dakota than Iowa. And 2 weeks later, Peter and Martha were married on April 2nd. A day after my birthday, June 14th, this would have been June 15th, we went to the courthouse and my name was changed from Jeffrey Lloyd Rasmussen to Jeffrey Peter Vadheim. And I don't remember this, but they tell me that the judge looked at me and say, Jeffrey, do you want your name to be changed to Jeffrey Vadheim? And I looked at him and I said, I sure do. So another family legend. So the Pushings, our next door neighbors. In 1949, Martha and Lloyd added onto the house when they adopted me, and the next year the Pushings bought the empty property next door and built a new house. They had been living on the north side of town. They had 2 children, Carol, age 10, and Todd, aged 8. And then at age 42, Gwen found herself pregnant with a surprise Brent, so their house was too small. They had come to Olivia in 1932 and taken over 2 dying newspapers, the Times and the Journal, and made the Olivia Times Journal. Gwen had been valedictorian of her class in South Dakota and quite well educated, so she was the grammarian and proofreader for Vern's articles in the newspaper. They were about 5 to 7 years older than Mom and Lloyd were, but they were 8 to 12 years younger than Peter and Florence were. For some reason, Gwen was quite close to Florence, but not so much to my mom, even though they lived right next door to each other and had kids the same age for several years until Mom went back to work at the store. I've often thought that Gwen may have been envious of Mom, who didn't have a college education, that she was successful with the store, and Gwen, with a college education, was probably overeducated for her life in Olivia. She had been a school teacher, and then in Olivia she hung out with other educated women in arts clubs and had erudite meetings over intellectual things rather than just playing bridge. And she would substitute teach and help at the library, and eventually she became the librarian for some time. Her oldest child, Carol, was very intelligent, was a good golfer, became the women's champion of Minnesota, I think more than once. She went to Carleton College, graduated summa cum laude, and so she was pretty smart. Todd went to dental school, and so that gave him a gold star in her mind. And then along came Brent, a Taurus who was clever and industrious, but not an A student. He was maybe a B/C student on a good day when he'd apply himself. But of course, often he wouldn't apply himself in direct opposition to his mother's desires. So this created a lot of arguing and loud shouting matches at their house. Gwen and Mother didn't go back and forth borrowing cups of sugar or having coffee. She just wasn't that kind of neighbor. She came from a Swiss family, and maybe she was just a little more private because of that. Her husband, Vern, was Polish. The name used to be Pushinsky. She made him change it to Pushing when they got married. She didn't like a Polish suffix. And he was a quiet man. He tended to escape the arguments in the house by standing in his yard looking for crabgrass and tending his roses. And he and my dad were cordial and business partner friends. The newspaper was across from the drugstore, and they'd get together at 4 o'clock every day, go to Bozo's Cafe down the street and have coffee and roll dice, playing 6-5-4 to see who would pay. Brent and I would try to time that many times and ride down there after school on our bikes and join them because we could get a fountain-made cherry Coke, and those were really good. Brent was like the brother I didn't have because his siblings, were 8 and 10 years older. They didn't want to have anything to do with us, and I hardly ever even remember them being in the household. The only thing I remember is that Brent got his brother Todd so frustrated once as a teenager that he picked him up and threw him through the plate glass window in the dining room, which caused Brent a big laceration on his arm. I don't know if Todd got punished or what happened, but that was Brent. Together we had a lot of fun with very creative play. TV was in its infancy. We didn't get TVs till we were like 6 or 7, and the reception was poor, so you couldn't get very many shows, but there were a few kids shows in the afternoon. And then later on in grade school, we had Axel and his dog from WCCO in Minneapolis, and he showed Little Rascals and Laurel and Hardy and Three Stooges two-reelers, which we would then go out in the backyard and reenact. The best place we had was Len's junkyard, which was behind the Pushing's house. They erected a huge fence to hide it, but Len Miller tore down old houses and then stripped out all the valuable plumbing and pipes and everything and stored it in his backyard. And he also took in junked cars and parted them out. So there was an old car shell that was basically a body with no seats, engine, or doors, but to us that was a spaceship. And when we'd go to the movies, there was always a serial called Lost in Space that was played before with the cartoons, and it was a cheesy space show, not done very well, but we would come home and get in that old car shell and reenact it. We had more fun playing there. I think Len and his wife knew we played back there and they didn't mind, and we'd sometimes borrow some stuff and bring it around the fence into Pushing's backyard. They had a little section next to their garden that was all gravel, and it was great for play. Because we could run our trucks and scoop sand up and dig trenches, and it was okay to do that. Our favorite toy when we were very little was a cast aluminum John Deere tractor with a trailer, and I think the Pushings and my folks got together whenever they were purchasing a major toy, and they would discuss it because Brent and I had to have the same thing, so the Pushings would buy him the identical item. And when my mom went to the cities for market, she'd bring a present back for me, and she'd always bring the same thing for Brent, but just in a different color. So with our little tractors, we'd ride up and down the sidewalk in front of the Pushing's house because there was no public sidewalk in front of our house, and it was hard to ride on the grass. We used their garage as a great play place. We called it our working man's garage, and we had a uniform. We had blue jeans with rolled up cuffs, and we had short boots with orange laces that went through the eyelets and then around the hooks, and the laces were so long you had to wrap them around your leg and then double tie them in front. If our laces came untied, we would knock on anybody's door where a mother was, so she'd retie our shoelaces. And I remember a couple of the women would put double knots in them, so that would last us for the whole day. In the working man's garage, we would take peach crates and stretch saran wrap over them, put knobs on made out of old wooden thread spools, and call them TVs. Gwen had taken the handle off the hose spigot in the garage because she didn't want us turning the water on, but Vern would have to use it sometimes, so he'd go get the handle and set it back on without the screw, so it was sitting there. And we made that into our telephone. We'd pick the handle up and put it to our ear and talk into the spigot as though it was a phone. The garage had a set of sunken steps that went down to their basement. They had a split level house, so 5 steps went down into this sort of a pit. And we thought that was the elevator that came up into our garage, and there was a pencil sharpener on the wall, and we would stand there and crank it this way for going up and crank it the other way for going down. Uh, we played with all the tools there, and for the most part I don't think we got into trouble, but we had a lot of fun playing there. The next vlog will go into the more advanced and creative play that we had once we went to school and could read and write. And this continued all the way until we were like 13 and 14. You'll find out about that next time.